Hello, everyone. I'm starting a series of podcasts on the topic of senior military leaders and general officers and admirals in our military. And it's going to be a wide range of topics that we're going to discuss. But today I'm just going to start out with retired general officers and what happens when they retire. And then later on, we're going to talk about some other issues in terms of accountability and responsibility in other podcasts. And what makes a good general based on study of other generals during from World War II onwards. Who is the next General Patton? So do we have are we educating and making these combat leaders of the future that we're going to require? Force transformation. Everybody's doing force transformation now, especially the Marine Corps. But transformation requires good leaders because bad leaders can drive out good leaders. That's Grisham's law in economics. Bad money drives out good money. So the same sort of applies in the military. So that's part of this whole series of senior military leaders that we're doing on this podcast, and we'll talk through some of these issues. You may agree with me, you may disagree with me, but at least we're making each other think about these issues, and they're very important issues because they apply to our sons and daughters in the current conflicts that are going on and the future conflicts. So I had a couple of people write in and ask me about my thoughts on an article that was recently published, and it's called "The March of the Four Stars: The Role of Retired Generals and Admirals in the Arms Industry." So this is a sort of a hot topic because people want to know as a result of all these conflicts that are going on, and there's a lot of discussion about the military-industrial complex, and there's supporters on both sides of this issue. On one side is probably the Major General Smedley Butler crowd, who wrote a seminal book called "War is a Racket" and talks about the military-industrial complex, and they also quote, President General Eisenhower about be wary of the military-industrial complex because it's a massive, massive industry with an incredible amount of resources. They have tremendous amount of influence on politicians in Congress. They have an incredible amount of influence on policy through lobbyists. And they also hire retired general officers and admirals. So, as an example, this article talks about 26 of the 32 four-star general officers that retired between 2018 and 2022 went to work for the military-industrial complex of defense corporations. So that's a huge issue. These are just four-star generals, bear in mind. There's a host of other generals. So the article also goes into talking about there's roughly about 1,700 senior officers that went to work for the military-industrial complex. Now, what happens here now? But certainly every person has a right to take care of his family when they retire. That's not the issue here. Absolutely not. I don't care what rank you are. You do your service honorably. You have the right to go out and seek other jobs. But the issue really comes down to this: when you start having a conflict of interest, because a lot of these generals are out there in the public making commentary, having discussions publicly. They're writing articles in support of or against certain policy decisions that this country makes. So, for example, when we're going to Iraq, there were a boatload of retired generals that came out in favor of us invading Iraq. Now, were they of the best of intentions, or did they have a conflict of interest? So whenever I see a general officer or a flag officer on TV, giving commentary on, for example, Ukraine and Russia, my first thought is, where's this conflict of interest? So why does not he disclose? Does he work for any defense corporation? Does he have investments in any defense corporations? And that's just for clarity. I think the viewer should have the right to know. So the viewer can decide themselves where did the interests of this person lie. So that's one issue that we seriously need to consider. And there's a lot of discussion in Congress right now to be able to change this. So, for example, they want to have laws enacted where there's a cooling off period where the general officer or the admiral has to be barred from working for defense corporations for 4 years. And I think that's reasonable. It should be probably 4 or 5 years is absolutely reasonable. There's also discussions about retired senior officers can't work for companies that have contracts in excess of $1 billion with the U.S. government. That's a pretty high number. I think it should probably be around 100 million. Essentially, the cost of a fighter jet. That's the way I'm thinking. But we need to enact all these provisions and regulations, and it's really for public transparency, so we know what these people are up to. They've got an incredible amount of influence. They've got an incredible amount of foreign contacts. I read one article. We've got over 500 senior officers working on behalf and approved by the U.S. government for foreign countries, on a variety of different contracts. So these people are, essentially deployed all over the world, working for this greater military industrial complex. So that's one thought. The other issue is in 2009, USA Today did an exceptional article where they talked about, essentially about 160 general officers that were in the military mentorship program, which is an exceptional program. I happen to be working within this program in my previous job when I worked for the MACTAF staff training program. And we used to have mentors, and they were fantastic. They brought in a wealth of knowledge. We used to call them the graybeards, and they're bona fide war heroes. And they had the experience, and they shared that experience with other officers during our war games and whatnot, and during our training seminars. So it was a valuable experience. But again, there was a conflict of interest because we didn't know who these officers, these generals, retired generals, actually worked for. They didn't have a financial disclosure. They were independent contractors, so they came on board, and roughly some of them were making anywhere from $200 to $400 an hour. They flew first class. They stayed in hotels, and they were well taken care of. And whichever command they went to, because of their background and their lineage, they're treated essentially like royalty. And, for the most part at the time, I was a major lieutenant colonel, and I was one of their action officers. I would do all the NUG work, write all the papers, and be as an observer in the exercise. I would, develop talking points for the general because he wouldn't sit through the entire exercise. He's there, meeting with other senior officers and having his discussions as sidebars. And then we would provide him, the critiques and the comments for the debrief. So essentially, we were giving him a piece of paper saying, "Hey, these are the critiques and these are the comments that we recommend you discuss." And yet, these people are making an incredible amount of money. I mean, it's a choice. It was like the filet mignon of a retirement type job. So it was a great opportunity for this general. So out of the 160 some, 80% of these people, when they came out in the mentorship program, and when Secretary Gates said, "Hey, you got to start doing disclosures," everybody started backing off from it and said, "No, we don't," so they dropped out of the mentorship program essentially, and they didn't want to do the financial disclosure because they're making too much money for the military industrial complex. So my point is quite simply is this, as general officers, yes, you're patriotic. You have an incredible, amount of knowledge that you have based on your 40 years of experience, and you should be paid well. But there ought to be public transparency. And what that public transparency warrants is, hey, I am General so-and-so. I happen to work for, company so-and-so that does business with the U.S. government in the following sector. That's it. That's all you got to tell us. So then people can decide for themselves what is right and what is wrong. And do you have a conflict of interest? So I think we have to be very privy to it. I certainly don't, I've got an incredible amount of respect for generals. And they're good guys, trust me. Bear in mind, Department of Defense has failed 6 audits in a row. So we need transparency, and we need it bad, and we need it across the board. Okay, that's all I got. Count out.